Once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. As he sat, as he watched and waited while his billy bawled, "Who'll come a waltzing Matilda with me?" Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Arnie Lukes at the Crossroads. We've got the home forum today, which concentrates on family. And the home actually was named after a journal that Geoffrey and Elizabeth Dobbs wrote for years, which was a development, an evolution, if you like, from the British Housewives Association. And that's where we got the name from. I'd like to welcome Beata from Adelaide. Welcome, Beata, to the forum.
Good morning, Arnie. Good morning, all.
And Judy from Victoria. Welcome, Judy.
Thank you. Good morning, Arnie. Good morning, everyone.
Okay. Now, last week we spoke about fluoridation, compelled medication, mass medication. And I believe that we presented a compelling case. Fluoride, first of all, added to water, is not of a pharmaceutical grade. Secondly, any doctor worth his salt will monitor any chemical, any drug given to a patient independently. They'll test them, monitor them, make sure there's no adverse reactions, etc., etc. Whereas our fluoride is added en masse. And en masse to a newborn child, en masse to a 20-stone bloke working in the desert in the Pilbara, where he drinks 10 to 15 litres of water per day. And so the amount of actual exposure to fluoride per individual is all over the place. And there's no science in it. There's no science in a sense of controlling any medication whatsoever. And then, of course, the third major point is that some people may have adverse reactions to fluoride. And on the basis of that, what do they do to opt out of the system to manage their health? Because the state has mandated, and about 90% of Australia is subject to mandatory fluoride in their water. The state has mandated that you've got to make your own arrangements. There's no subsidies, there's no nothing. So, of course, those people who do have perhaps an underactive thyroid as a consequence of fluoride, they have to manage their health outside of that. And it says, the argument is, yes, but it reduces caries, it reduces tooth decay. Well, finally, let's have a look at it. Now, Queensland's only been having fluoridated water for a few years. And there was a study done, and I put it to you, do your own homework on this one, a study done, and it presented the case that Queensland cavity for every age group was equal to or less than all the other states. And so it's, hang on a sec, fluoride, no change in cavities. Why is it happening? We go back to the what was the nail in the coffin on this whole argument, as far as I'm concerned, was from Hansard in Victoria, where the member for South Barwon, Dixon, he presented the case that fluoride is actually administered, has been historically administered to prisoners of war in order to subdue them. In order to make them easier to manage. And of course, you realise then our governments are Bolshevising, they're brutalising us in order to control us. And that's my compelling argument on fluoride, and I think we've covered it. Now, today we want to talk about vaccines. And I wanted to touch on a report that I just saw just this morning, and that was, I'm going to go across to Natural News, there it is there, a report just this morning, and it talks about that vaccine itself, autism rates and vaccine correlate. If you've got high vaccine rates, then you have high autism rates. And you say, how could you say that? How could you say that? Well, the report's here. And the fact is that this report came in from the Canadian government. All right, and the Canadian government is actually monitoring. There's the report. Go to Natural News, read it yourself. High vaccine rates, high autism rates. They correlate. And this goes across Canada. And so what we're doing is we're starting to build a case in regard to, should we reconsider this whole policy, no jab, no play, no jab, no pay, which was a conservative government policy and of course endorsed by the Bolsheviks, the Soviets, or the Labour Party. They're all the same. There's no difference. They're all Bolsheviks, the Conservatives and the Labour. They're all Bolsheviks. They're all tyrants. And so I'm going to actually open the floor up now to see if we can continue to build a compelling case against mandatory or state brutalised, Bolshevised vaccines. Judith Auchterlonie.
When you investigate vaccination and what's in a vaccine and the side effects of vaccination, you realise quickly that it should not be compulsory. People should be able to have a choice, and they should be able to decide for themselves and for their children whether or not they're going to maybe put them at risk by having them vaccinated as per government orders.
Thank you, Judy. That's an important point. We'll just go across to the University of Oxford. And the University of Oxford here, it's the Vaccine Knowledge Project, and it gives you some information as to what some of the ingredients are. Aluminium, heavy metal, thimerosal. Thimerosal is a, if you like, a trade name for mercury. And you say, hello, you've got heavy metals as the two first main ingredients of vaccines. And you think, why would you put heavy metals in? And then why would you be vaccinating children as soon as they're out the womb, or worse still, children while they're in the womb across the placenta? Because these heavy metals travel across the placenta. These are significant questions that need to be answered. If autism is essentially an outcome of a high vaccine rate, and heavy metals are part of the ingredients of vaccines, aren't we looking at causation, correlation? Correlation isn't causation. I mean, hang on a sec. We need to have another look. Beata.
I would like to go a little back to what you said before about fluoridation and whether it should be done and on whose authority. And there was an added article, or article in the Constitution was extended in 1948, I believe, and it said that the government will provide widows' pension and healthcare and dental services, but that they can do it only not as to authorize any form of civil conscription, which means civil enlisting, which means pushing it on the population. So they have absolutely no right to do it. And the same goes for vaccination and adding fluoride to the water. So it's unconstitutional.
I'm just going to put a two-bob or a disclaimer in on that, devil's advocate, is that the Constitution as a legal document, as I understand it, supreme law of the land, is how we will operate as a group of states in the Federation. And it essentially binds our federal government to certain parameters. And also it limits its power and authority. And I think that this, unless you've got a state government willing to fight them on the issue, then a lot of things go through to the keeper. And in this case, fluoride was added, is done by the state governments. It's done by councils, but councils are actually an extension of the state governments. And on that basis, they're mass medicated from the state level. And so we've got to really look at how do we make these politicians accountable, and how do we make more importantly, the bureaucrats who actually come up with these ideas accountable. Judy.
Accountability, Arnie, if we could only make them accountable for their decisions, wouldn't that be good? Yeah, I think no question, they're under pressure from other people, our politicians, obviously. They're listening to the wrong people. Or vested interests, I guess, is probably the main one. and as you say, just a part of the overall plan to dumb us down, make us all pliable and placid human beings so that they can manipulate us even more. And I don't know, Arnie. I'll have to leave that one.
No worries. Thank you for that, Judy. That is important. That we've got to have the energy, we've got to have the will, the desire to at least look into these things for ourselves. And that's, to me, is the big argument that I keep working through. Is if I do actually do my homework and I go after things, I try and actually go to the root cause of it. And the root cause often is philosophy. Are we free human beings? Are we free, moral, responsible human beings? If we are, then that's rooted, that is grounded in our Christian philosophy. If we're not, if we need to be controlled, if we need to be manipulated, medicated by some elite over and above us, that's another philosophy. That's where power and authority is not within the individual, it's outside. And of course these elites demonstrate again and again and again that they have feet of clay. That they're the same as us, they're certainly no better. And in actual fact, historically they can be quite a demonstrable worse. Now, I'm going to bring up systems. I'm going to bring up my story on systems and why are systems important. And this is where we go to. Weary Dunlop spoke or wrote the War Diaries. But he didn't actually go to write the War Diaries until 40 years after the war ended. The reason being was that there was so much bitterness and so much disgust with what had actually transpired in the course of war. And the thing is that in that he looks at it and he says, well, why was the bitterness, why were the Japanese so brutal, why was the prisoners of war situation so brutalized? And it came back to the systems that the Japanese soldier were trained under. And I might add that I believe our soldiers are trained under. And that is that they were brutalized from the start, so they were in a position mentally and psychologically prepared to kill. And that's the function of the soldier, as sad as it sounds, but that's the truth of it. I once heard those very words come out of an army chaplain when he said there's only two functions of the army. One is to kill people and destroy property. That is the function of the army. And of the soldier, excuse me. And you think about that and you think, okay, is a person actually just off their own bat going to be willing to go and kill someone else? And I don't believe that it's a natural thing. In fact, you would find it abhorrent that you would do something sinister and grave to another human being. It's not an easy thing to actually work yourself up to. And I know that if someone's coming through the window of your home in the middle of the night, you've got to wind yourself up to be that person, because you're defending your home. And so you've got to go really hard and be very determined that I'm going to offer sufficient resistance to protect my home. So it's a very hard question of how do you actually get yourself to that point. And of course with a soldier they have to be brought to that point, and they have systems in place. Now, Weary Dunlop talked about that. I'm going to get to you in a sec, baby. Weary Dunlop talked about that in his book, that there were systems that were there, and those systems essentially brutalised the soldiers in order for them to be able to brutalise prisoners and the enemy. And so systems were designed for that. Now, we come back to vaccines, we come back to fluoridation, Bolshevizing, brutalising, it's the same thing. Brutalising the population. That's what we're actually seeing transpired. And of course, last century, 60 million Russians were killed by the Soviets. 90 million Chinese were killed by the communists. That's brutalising. And that's systems. And that's why it's you've got to look at this thing. This question, most important. Philosophically based questions are most important. All right, we're going to give the floor to Beata.
Since you mentioned the soldiers, I must say that soldiers are routinely subject of vaccination and they would be trying new vaccines on the soldiers before anyone else. So they getting abused by all sorts of chemicals in those vaccines. And then, of course, the results are unknown. The trauma that they go through in theater of war, if you can use that word, it's bizarre, adds to all the suffering. And the sad thing about vaccines is that the whole science came from the wrong understanding of what a vaccine will do to the human being, how it will destroy the immune system by protecting them from something that really the child should go through to become stronger.
Okay,
Yes,
thank you.
so I'll have to mention Louis Pasteur, who is of course responsible for it, and the whole what do you call it, Academy of Science in France, and then the world picking up on his research that was done in the wrong direction, basically.
I'm just going to cut across you, Beata, because I've been able to find it, and that is this book in the Veritas Bookshop, Béchamp or Pasteur, a lost chapter in the history of biology, and it talks about essentially the workings of this bloke Béchamp, and how formidable a scientist he was, and it presents Pasteur in not necessarily a good light, and so I would recommend that book to you to at least understand the history of science in that area, because the argument is we're going to inject you with these products, and in amongst that it's going to stimulate your immune system, and then you're going to be able to overcome that particular disease, and I've seen it report after report where children have caught diseases even though they've been vaccinated, and sorry, I don't accept that. It either works or it doesn't, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, and so you've got to consider these compelling arguments that science is not settled on this issue. Judy.
The fact that children are picking up, whooping cough's a classic, even though they've been vaccinated, doesn't ring alarm bells anywhere except in those of us who care about these matters. And I do know also that we are, nowadays, new mums will not let someone near their baby unless they have had a recent whooping cough vaccination. And that's what I've seen in South Australia. I can't speak for over here. My goodness. And yes, I do believe I had vaccinations for whooping cough years ago as a child, and then when I, in my late teens, and I believe I had a whooping cough incident about 10 years ago. It doesn't give immunity, it's not giving immunity, and when people query it, well, you better have another vaccine then, because that one hasn't worked. I don't know.
Thank you for that, Judy. That's important. Now, I'm just going to touch on something here. I'm going to bring a new subject into our forum because we're more than halfway through. And okay, we're presenting a case about a compelling case, in my view, about reconsidering the efficacy of vaccines and whether a newborn child should have vaccines, and in some cases have multiple vaccines in this period of brain and nervous system development. Even in the womb, the pregnant mother, should she be exposed to vaccines, these heavy metals that go across the placenta? These are scientific questions, in the sense that the science has to answer them, not me. The heavy metals travel across the placenta. That's clear. All right. Is it going to affect the brain development of the unborn child? That's not clear. And the fact that vaccination rates and autism is going through the roof. If there is a modern day epidemic, it is autism spectrum disorder. You go and chase up the statistics and you'll see that it's in epidemic proportions. And the medical fraternity are saying nothing about it. And you come back to the question, well, who benefits? Out of vaccines, who benefits? Well, obviously there's something in it for every doctor because they're administering a vaccine. Oh, how could you be so brutal that the doctor might have a vested interest? Well, he's not the only one. Let's line it up. He gets paid for administering a vaccine. Who's the main recipient of the funds from each vaccine? Well, obviously it's the pharmaceutical industry. That's right. Billions. Hundreds of billions. This isn't pennies. Hundreds of billions. They benefit by this whole science. And is it flawed science or is it solid science? Well, do your homework. Mike Adams, he's doing us a service. He's at least asking the question. Now, we come back to, I guess, ultimately, a question of philosophy in this. Can we make our own decisions? Are we capable of making our own informed decisions, doing our own homework? That to me is what this is about. Should I as an individual have the right? Should I have, in fact, an inalienable right? Not derived by a Bill of Rights, but inalienable, derived from God. I was born free. And therefore, on the basis that in fact, there was a movie about Born Free, about lions, but as a human being, born free. And on that basis, then, it's up to me to inform myself and to make decisions and to consult more than one opinion. I mean, in the medical fraternity, you're allowed a second opinion. I find it fascinating that it's only one paradigm, and that's it. You play to this tune, or the doctor will basically sack you. And don't tell me that won't happen, because that happened to me. My doctor sacked me, and I sacked my doctor at the same time, because he had a point of view that it was adamant I had to adhere to his point of view, and I was adamant, no, I'm not going to. I'm going to take a different path, another point of view that's different from what you think. And I'm still here, and I'll point to it. This little mark on my nose, cancer, the threat of it, okay, I manage it myself. And I do it on a daily basis, and this is self-medicating. Okay, the fool lawyer who defends himself, well, okay, well, I'm the fool person who uses herbs and spices and things like that in order to manage my health. And I do it through as much raw food as comes across our kitchen, comes out of our backyard. Now, this philosophy that we're talking about, and this is probably the run-up for this forum today, this philosophy we're talking about, which is the right of someone to choose or refuse one thing at a time. And denied that right is where you have essentially the philosophy that only the bureaucrat knows what's good for you. Only the vested medical fraternity and pharmaceutical industry know what's good for you. Okay, I've got a different point of view, and I beg to differ, and I insist that I have that right to differ. So I'm just going to bring this up here because this really demonstrates, in my view, this is ABC News, and it talks about this basic income trial. Now, basic income is essentially an assured income for individuals, whether they work or not, and they're not brutalised by the state to send out to go and knock on so many doors and apply for so many jobs before they get some sort of meagre token support. But rather it's just simply an automatic payment that every person in the community gets. And the argument in this article is that it's a timeless welfare dilemma. All right, timeless welfare dilemma. Should people get something for nothing? And I put it to you that it's a philosophical argument. Basic income, or an assured income, so that you can live your life. In this age of robotics, automation, industrialization, nuclear energy. I mean, you say nuclear as in nuclear generated electrical energy. We've got so much, we produce maybe 1,000 times more than what a man did 300 years ago. 1,000 times more with the amount of energy and technology and automation and know-how that's been inherited. And if we're producing so much, and we are, the stores are full, we can't sell it. Now, that's a separate question, and I won't answer that now. But the point is that if we're producing so much, what do we do with this spare time? And the basic income says, well, that's your time. It's what you choose to do. Now, I know that the argument with the basic income is that it's based on taxes or further debt. That's a separate argument. But the idea of getting in a dividend or a guaranteed income so that you can buy what we produce, to me, is a philosophical argument. So I'll open the forum up and see what the forum has to say about that. Beata.
Wonderful concept to have more leisure in lifetime, rather than running off to work and spending all the daylight hours there, to bring meager returns to the home. I would rather spend some more time in the garden. Maybe ladies could work 3 days a week instead of 5, and that way spend more time with their children, or just work half a day during those hours when children are at school. That would help the families to bond. That would give the parents more insight into what their children are doing, how they're growing up, how they're developing. This is returning back to the natural law, I would call it.
Thank you for that, Beata. That's a beautiful picture that you just painted there. And that is when I talked about systems in the War Diaries with Weary Dunlop. And what we're looking at with what Beata just painted, that picture, similar to what she does behind me, that beautiful picture, is it's one of wholesome family environment. It's one of where the both parents are not compelled in this age of robotics and automation. They're not compelled to go to work. They're not compelled, they're not brutalized to send them out to what really is industrial coal mines, industrial salt mines, unnecessarily. We don't need everyone working. What we need to do is have sufficient spending power to buy what we make. And that's a separate question entirely. Now, the basic income as a concept, I think it's flawed, and I think it's actually designed to be flawed, because they'll never get to the answer of credit creation and this power of banks to create money out of nothing. But the fact is that the idea of having a policy to develop and enhance family, to build communities, to allow individuals time of leisure. I'm not talking about putting your feet up, drinking beer, watching footy. I'm talking about leisure. This is what we're doing here. It's our pleasure to have leisure, to look at this pursuit of truth, of knowledge, of understanding of how things work, and to think more deeply. And that to me is what this is about. The Puritan, bureaucrat, fascist, communist, call him what you like, he doesn't want you to have time to think. He just wants to brutalize you. Whereas the Christ-centered philosophy says no. Consider the lilies of the field. They don't toil nor spin. Look how God adorns them. What's it? Till not. It's toil. Toil not. Jesus said, toil not. Think of these weightier things. Our faith is one of abundance. The material world demonstrates that abundance. The financial system, the multinational industrial conglomerates want to hide it, and they want to brutalise us by dumbing us down, fluoride, by removing reasoning from our mind. And that's what autism is all about. It stops you from imagining. It stops you from actually seeing the real world situation. Instead, you just process it, and it's a brutalized environment. And I put it to you that they are poles apart, and it's philosophy. It's philosophical. This is why we've got to go back to our roots. Judy.
It's a lovely thought, Arnie, isn't it? Mums being able to stay at home and look after their families without having to race out the door, and
Excuse me.
and get that second income so that families can make ends meet because of their financial commitments. I don't suppose it's the time to go into how we can have a proper income without being financed with it by government. Of course, then that means more taxes. So, you know, that's the automatic thing people think about. Oh, well, we're already paying too much tax now, basic income. And that hurdle of you must work to earn your right to live, that's a massive hurdle when you think about it. And it's out there in the population, you know. Oh, look at him, dull bludger, doesn't want to work, and he's still getting an income. Yeah, that's a big issue, Arnie.
I agree with you, Judy. It is a big issue, and it's a philosophical issue. Now, I'm just going to bring up our Veritas books again, and I'll show you the story of the Commonwealth Bank. It's a very good little book. $5. We've got 400 something in stock, and we'll reprint them if we run out. And just letting you know that why is the story of the Commonwealth Bank so important? It's because the then Governor, Denison Miller, the Commonwealth Bank, financed significant infrastructure in Australia, processed the entire First World War for Australia, and we came out of it debt-free. That's financial policy. And that was releasing the resources of the Commonwealth in defence of the Commonwealth. And that was the purpose. That was actually the words of our then Prime Minister, I believe. Now, the point I'm getting at in this is that financial policy is the root of so many ills. Jesus warned about it. You cannot serve God and mammon. You love one or the other. And the fact is that, you know, we can turn around and we can point to the church, but we've got to come back and point to the individual, us, our preference, our first preference above all other things. Is it money or is it serving God? And so it's a big challenge. It comes back to us as individuals, but it also comes back to institutions. Are they moral and ethical? Are systems put in place for them to be moral and ethical? And in actual fact, I don't believe they are. I think the systems are actually designed to brutalise, and we see that with the policy of industry, profit at all costs. This business of what's going on in the Middle East, that's got nothing to do. This Saddam Hussein, his weapons of mass destruction, lies. You know, imminent devices being sent across to Britain, lies. You know, chemical weapons on their own population, lies. Constant lies in order to foster a view, when in actual fact what's going on is that industry and finance are making significant profits out of this thing. It's lucrative. 50% of the American economy is now making weapons. I mean, come on. Is this it? Is this really the system? Is this where we are as a people, as humanity? Solzhenitsyn said in his Templeton Address, I think in 1978, we've put it on our website, why did the Soviets turn on the Russians? Why did they destroy? What did the Russians do wrong? And the sages, the ancients of the time, they answered the question. It's because we forgot God that all these things happened. And Solzhenitsyn said he spent, in his Templeton Address, he'd spent 50 years analysing what went on. And Dostoevsky was another one who wrote, and he explained the policy, I think, of Lenin, of what it was all about. The two branches, Sovietizing branches, and they both came to the same conclusion. We forgot God. And that's what the whole thing is about. We've got to put things in place. We are subject to natural laws. We didn't make this world. We were born into this world. We didn't make our freedom. We were given freedom. It's inherent in us. It's inalienable. It's a right that we're born with. And so it comes that a state or a system is made for the benefit of man. The Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. A state or a system. The purpose of government, the purpose of the state, is to serve the individual. That's what this Christian philosophy is all about. It's the only one out there that's doing it, by the way. Put your hand up, anyone else who wants to reinforce that point. Does your religion, does your system of government insist that the purpose of the state is to serve the individual, or is it one of autocracy, one of technocracy, one of brutalising the individual into submission? And so we see it right around the world. And there's a clear distinction. This is the choice we make. And we're running up to the 35-minute mark. I think we've had a compelling argument as to why the system isn't right. And I'll give these ladies one last chance to just put their arguments on. So Judy, I'll give you the floor just in closing comments, please.
Yeah, thanks, Arnie. Yeah, it has been good this morning, hasn't it? We've covered lots of topics. The basic income, it's good to clear that up. That's as it's presented to us in the world today. That's a lousy idea. Hasn't worked, and there is a better way. We know there's a better way. Bring it on.
Good girl. Thank you for that. That's exactly right. A clear distinction between the basic income and a dividend. And one is, as Dennis and Miller presented, one can be debt-free, and the other one, of course, is based on taxes and debt. And so there is a clear distinction between it, the dividend, and we need to understand that. That's a very important point. Thank you for that closing comment, Judy. Beata.
Man has always tried to impose utopia on others. So one of those things is, of course, the system that they are trying to impose in Finland or other countries for that matter, which is of course based on the wrong principle. So yes, I'm sure we will be forgetting what the Old Testament says and going into what Christ said.
Thank you for that, Beata. That's a good closing comment. So I won't go over it again. I think we've got a compelling argument for us to reconsider the role of government, whether they should have the authority to mass medicate us, to impose or brutalise us over vaccines, and whether or no we should actually have an opportunity in this automotive age, this age of technology, of science, of industrialisation, of where men produce 1,000 times more than they did 300 years ago. My words, they may not be accurate. It might only be 950 times. And if I'm wrong, I'm sorry. Arnie Lukes from the Crossroads signing out. Once was a swagman camped by a billabong under the shade of a coolabah tree. As he sat, as he watched and waited while his billy boiled, you'll come a waltzing Matilda with